welcome to the Fantasy Rewind podcast. I'm your co-host, Dylan Stoll, and I'm joined as always by my friend Mike.
Hey!
So today, we're going to be going back to One Piece and talking about episode 2 titled
The Man in the Straw Hat.
The Man in the Straw Hat. And of course, we're talking about the live action series, not the manga, not the anime, but the Netflix original live action series. Alright, before we go on any farther, I'm going to give out the typical reminders. If you want to get in contact with the show, you could send us an email, which is fantasyrewindpod@gmail.com. We're also on Instagram, which is @fantasyrewindpod, and X, which is @fantasyrewind. Alright, without further delay, Mike, let's dive into the rewind.
Fantasy Rewind. Alright, Dylan, episode 2. So in this episode, we get to see, or we meet Buggy the Clown, who is, I believe, the second person in the series so far who has had a devil fruit power. And in this episode, we get a lot of flashbacks, a lot of information about how Luffy got his abilities, the drawbacks of having the devil fruit powers, and so on. And it's all kind of really nicely sort of melded together, in my opinion. Because as you're kind of going through the present time with Buggy, you have flashbacks to Shanks and, as I said, how he got his abilities, and it kind of mirrors itself and plays off of itself pretty nicely. Couple things here that I wanted to bring up that I thought was really nice that they did. In the first episode, when we see Goldie Rogers getting executed, in the crowd you see Shanks, and you actually do see Buggy, because they were crew members on Goldie Rogers' ship. So it was a really nice fan service moment, even though that hasn't really been mentioned.
Yeah, I was gonna say
yet,
that I don't think Buggy mentions that. I don't think that Shanks mentions it in the bit that we see of him in this episode, but we do know that from just the anime.
Yeah, and they do mention though that they were together, and Buggy hates Shanks, which is true. Buggy blames Shanks for a lot of things, and we kind of get that in interactions between him and Luffy. As I said, I thought it was a really well done episode in terms of that, and I want to talk about in more depth some of what happened throughout. But overall, what was kind of your opinion on how they sort of interlaid these two things? Because sometimes when shows do flashbacks, they sort of just do a giant info dump, maybe at the beginning of an episode, and then then you, as you're watching the episode, you're like, oh, kind of doing callbacks, that connects to that connects to that, whereas this is as it's going through the episode, they're kind of going back and forth multiple times.
Yeah, I felt like they did it really well, because like you had mentioned, the way they kind of interwove it within what was happening in the present with what was going on in the past. Mm-hmm. It was a good way to give you kind of that info dump in a way that wasn't beating you over the head with lore. It was in a more of a natural way, and it made total sense why they were telling you this when they were telling it to you. And I just thought that the way that they gave us this backstory was great. I loved everything about it. I really can't complain about anything here. And we're going to be talking about it later on, but even Buggy, as ridiculous as he is, this episode was very enjoyable for me.
Yeah, so let's kind of get into this here. So in this episode, we have Luffy and his crew, quote unquote. They still are we're not your crew, on the little ship, and they get taken out, captured by Buggy. It seems like they shot some kind of sleeping powder or something, and captured him. Now, this was interesting. It is a little bit different than what happened in the anime. Actually, quite a bit different in terms of the whole story here. And I don't want to get into too much of it, because honestly, I think they did a really nice job of sort of keeping it very succinct. In the anime, this was multiple episodes. This is drawn out, and it was still good. It wasn't bad by any means, but they took it and they condensed it into one episode, and I think they did a nice job of that. So Straw Hats got captured. They wake up in a crate, and they're talking because the thing that Buggy is after is the map of the Grand Line, because he wants to go there and find the One Piece, become the king of the pirates, just like every other pirate. And we have them, worried about the map, and Luffy's like, "Don't worry, I put it somewhere safe," and he had eaten it. And that's something that I'm glad they kind of kept, is that Luffy can ingest things because he is made of rubber, and it doesn't really necessarily hurt him.
And it also just shows his love of eating,
such as we'll find it. Yeah, very true. Very true. But anyway, Buggy knows, because obviously they're outside of the crate, that they have the map in their possession, and he wants it. So in this episode, we have them sort of showing off the circus, and Nami kind of tries to throw Luffy to the wind because she wants to escape, kind of showing her sort of thief mentality, which I liked. We also have a showcase of Luffy's powers, which grabs Buggy's attention because he's like, "Oh, you could be a freak in my circus, carnival, whatever." But I think this is really important. This episode did a couple of things really well that I liked. One, it emphasized the importance of having Luffy's hat. That's something in the show that you learn about pretty quickly, too, is how important that hat is to Luffy, and why it's important, because it's a promise to Shanks that he will become a great pirate, right? And he takes that very seriously. And it's used against him a couple of times in this episode. And it's sort of the beginning and the end, right? Because in the beginning, they're kind of making fun of him. Nami exploits it to sort of try to escape by throwing his hat up to have him stretch his arms up to get it, and that gives her. They're all shocked and gives her a minute to get outside. And at the end, she's fixing the hat for him. So I really like that sort of symbolism with that. I did want to talk really quickly about the differences, though, because I think there were a lot of differences in terms of the town. So this town is ransacked by Buggy, completely destroyed, which is pretty much how it is in the anime as well. But all the townspeople are in chains and have to watch the shows and laugh for Buggy's amusement. And I think this was a good choice, because we sort of avoided the conflict with the dog getting beaten.
So sad.
Which he beat up, which was so rough in the anime. So we avoid that, but we still get the brutality of these pirates. One thing I didn't like that they did in this episode, so just for everyone to know, I mean, I'm hoping everyone watched it, but Zoro and Nami get separated from Luffy. Luffy's getting basically drowned in seawater to prove how seawater weakens those who have ingested devil fruit powers. But we get the henchmen, right? And we sort of get just a brief glimpse at one of them, two of them. But after that, they're gone. Zoro takes care of them. But even in the episodes after, we don't, well, at least the next two episodes, we don't see them again. And that was kind of disappointing to me, because as much as Buggy is sort of a staple in the series, the anime, his pirates are kind of there too, and they're all kind of comedic
They
relief.
are, and I feel like the reason that their role was reduced was for the sake of time, because this is an 8-episode season, and they're trying to basically condense the entire Buggy the Clown arc in the very first season of the anime down into a single live-action episode. So, you don't have the side battles, with the Beastmaster. You don't have the side battle with the guy on the unicycle with the swords going after Zoro and everything like that. And while those beats are cool and everything, I think that where the live action is kind of taking us, it makes sense to have those people be in a much reduced role just because of the time crunch. But you do feel it. And, after watching the anime, you definitely feel that time crunch for this particular portion of it, with this whole Buggy the Clown arc being condensed down to such a short period of time.
And while they're condensing that, they do bring in more of
the flashback.
And I believe that's next episode. Well, yeah, flashbacks, but also Kobe has been much more present. But he's going to be more prevalent in the next two episodes than in this one. But anyway, let's just talk about the flashback really quickly. So, as someone who's watched the anime and has seen this flashback a couple of times, I thought they did a really nice job of staying true to the whole sequence of, Luffy eating the devil fruit, gaining the powers, Shanks saving him and losing his arm, seeing the Sea King, like all of that was really, really cool. And they even gave a little hint at Shanks' like abilities, which I thought was really nice. They showed a little glimpse. No. Yes, they did. And I thought that was really nice. They're doing a really good job of kind of staying true, but adding in some element. And also, again, upping the maturity a little bit in terms of just like blood, gore, and all of that.
So one thing that they did in the live action, which at least up to the point where I am in the anime, again, like around episode 205 or so, they haven't shown yet, is how Luffy got his scar on his face. Like, they showed in the live action here how, to prove to Shanks that he was tough enough to be a pirate, he cut his own face open to try to, like, show, see, I can take it, I can do this. And in the anime, at least where I am so far, they haven't addressed yet how Luffy got that scar.
Yeah, so that was fun. That was good. Also, too, it was nice seeing Shanks' crew, even though they weren't named. And we'll see some of the ramifications of that as well in the next 2 episodes. So, doing a really nice job with layering all of that in. That was also a big difference, too, that you pointed out, and I kind of forgot about. Yeah, so anything you want to add sort of on those, any other differences you may have noticed?
During the flashback portion, not really. That stayed pretty true to what was originally done. And like you said, just the way it was all done, the way they kind of hinted at hockey, the way they looked, or they showed the Sea Kings, and the way that just like Shanks was so nonchalant about losing his arm, which was crazy. Like, when I saw that, I'm like, what do you mean you're just gonna like shrug it off? Like, you just lost your arm, dude. And that's exactly the same way it happens in the anime. He's just like, I've got another one, I'm good. And just like, I haven't seen Shanks too much yet in the anime where I am, but he seems like such a chill, cool dude. Yeah.
He's a cool cat.
I like him already.
He's a cool cat. He's like one of my favorite characters, and I hardly ever see him, but that's all right. So anyway, and you also see kind of his crew's prowess, right, when they're fighting some of the bandits, and so that was cool to give them. I do think talking about
like that whole situation very briefly, where Shanks and his crew were at the restaurant, they were partying and everything, and then this other pirate crew comes in and starts like swaggering and like being a nuisance. They're bandits. Shanks was not like confrontational with them at all, and like allowed them to treat him like crap, because he was like, these people aren't even worth me putting through the effort of beating them up. Like, I'm just gonna endure what they want to do, and I will go about my business because they're that worthless to me. And just like that, that's something we do see Luffy kind of address later on in the series. But as far as like taking on like that same mentality with other pirates he doesn't deem worthy, but it was a very interesting way to kind of show how strong you are by just not engaging despite everything else going on, and it was very interesting.
It's a good scene. So I think we need to get to the main event, which is the fight between Buggy and Luffy. So after Luffy's he gets knocked out, he's put in the seawater container and basically getting slowly drowned, and Buggy's talking to him, and he starts talking about how Shanks abandoned him and all this, and we're having this interplay between some of the promise he made to Shanks and some of the flashback and the present, and Luffy's like adamant that his crew's going to come and help him, and he's like, no, they're not, they're basically dead. And Nami and Zoro had escaped at this point, and Zoro had taken care of the rest of Buggy's crew. Again, wish we could maybe have just seen just a little bit of that fight. Like, I feel like Zoro really hasn't had a chance to...
He'll get his chances.
...shine too much. I know. But outside of, like, in the first episode, the bar fight, which was cool. But want to say, too, that Nami, one thing I forgot to mention is that her attitude towards pirates came across very clearly. She was very empathetic to the townsfolk, even though when she's typically very selfish. And so that was also something that was addressed here too. And so you're getting hints at her backstory, which I like. They're layering that in too as we're going forward. Now the fight. We find out that Buggy also has a devil fruit power. He can be the chop fruit, the chop fruit, which he can just break apart into pieces and get back together, which is a pretty wild ability. And it was kind of cool how they had like him and Luffy fighting. Like, you know, Luffy punched a hole out of like a piece of him out of himself, and like he shot it back into himself. It was really fun. I thought that was great. I was just a touch disappointed by how quickly it kind of resolved. Again, I understand for the sake of time and everything else, like that makes sense. So I just wanted to see a bit more cool abilities from, I guess, Buggy. Because right now he just seems like a clown. Which he is, yeah.
So, like, am I hearing you right? Am I hearing you asking for longer boss fights?
Just, like, maybe an extra minute or two. That's it. Not
18 episode
episodes.
Boss fight coming up.
No, please, no. Just like a minute longer. Yes. I'm sure we'll get that later on, though. So, which is great. Yeah. What did you think about kind of the fight scene? And I didn't talk about how it got resolved, but you can...
Sure, yeah. So seeing Buggy using his chop fruit power was part of the trailer for One Piece that I had watched. And it was one of the things that actually drew me into wanting to see like how something so ridiculous was done live action. And the answer was ridiculously, but still in a way that was cool. And like, so while we're starting to see more like anime powers making their presence felt with the introduction of another devil fruit with Buggy here, like you're still seeing that like that balancing act between going full anime and live action realism, which I thought was cool. I thought that Buggy as a whole is so much cooler in the live action than he is in the anime. He is one of those characters that is a little whiny, annoying person in the anime, but I definitely enjoyed his attitude and his humor, and just like the way that they threw in like that ridiculousness into the fight, like you had mentioned, with Luffy punching a hole out of Buggy, and then Buggy like suctioning himself right back in there. And it also showed just like the resourcefulness of the Straw Hat crew as a whole, coming up with the idea of how to defeat a guy that you cannot defeat by preventing him from coming back together. So what ends up happening is they end up using Buggy's own environment against him and catching the pieces of him and locking them in various chests to kind of keep him from fully reassembling until he's down to just a little bitty Buggy head. And then they decide to part ways with him there. But it was a fun fight, and it does show just like that they are still going to embrace the weird, embrace the ridiculousness of One Piece. Just maybe not in the full throttle way that the anime and manga do.
Yeah, which is perfectly fine. I was talking to some people last night about this, and we had talked about how this was honestly, this is probably one of the best, in my opinion, this is the best adaptation of an anime that I've ever seen. It does such a great job of, hitting both the anime beats and some of that ridiculousness with realism and character development and like something people are going to want in a live action show. And so that's why I think it's been such a hit with so many people who typically would not watch anime. Plus, I mean, Luffy is just...
Yeah, I mean...
He's fantastic.
I'll say this episode after episode. The guy they have playing Luffy is so freaking phenomenal. Like, he does such a great job. Like, you just feel the energy coming from him. And what I really like about him, too, is the way, just like anime Luffy does it, the the way he's able to switch from being super sarcastic and funny and comedic to being deadly serious at the drop of a straw hat. And I think that that ability and that range for an actor to be able to have, especially a young actor like they have playing Luffy,
Oh yeah, he's only 20.
Such a great job. Love it.
Yeah. He's an attractive man, and he is energetic, and he's going for it. He's great. I do think it's been really cool to see that as well. I also want to say, too, just because I always think this is mind-blowing, and when we get into the episode with Zoro's backstory, me and Alexis were like, we didn't like the actor they had playing his younger self because we just felt age-wise it didn't mash up. But Luffy's only supposed to be 17 right now, sailing. So I think having him played by this 20-year-old is a really good fit, too, for that. I do feel like Nami's actress and Zoro's actor do look a little older. And I think that's where it starts to get a little tricky, like when you're trying to get those ages.
I mean, that's something that's so hard to do when you're talking about any film or movie or TV show based on like a comic or an anime or like another source material there. Just like finding that blend of how true to the original character's ages do you want to be? Because like you saw something like this in Game of Thrones. Like they aged up some of those characters. You're seeing it happening in some of the Wheel of Time show here, where they aged up those characters, and it's not always for the best. But like what I will say is that so far, it doesn't seem out of place for me that somebody Zoro and Nami's age are following Luffy or are with Luffy, because like even in the anime, like Zoro seems like he's definitely older than Luffy. Nami seems like she's roughly the same age as Luffy in the anime. And, like, live action wise, I'd probably put them all within, like, 3 years of each other. Like, it doesn't seem like Zoro's, like, a 40-year-old man hanging out with a teenager, which would have been really weird. But, yeah, I think that it's always, like, a tough, like, pill to swallow, or, like, a tough balance to achieve when you're trying to get those ages of the actors and their original characters just right, like the balance between those two.
That's a good point. So overall, I enjoyed this episode. Thought it was really nicely done, and yeah, I don't really have too much more to say on this one. I do think though, as we're going forward, we kind of discussed this, and I'm just saying this for anyone who's listening here. We're going to probably take some of the episode arcs and put them together. So that way we kind of get through the rest of the season fairly quickly. So that way when Percy Jackson comes out, we can...
Yes. Did we want to talk about Kobe at all and the Marine bit?
No, I kind of want to hold off on him until the next episode because I think it goes together really well. I will just say that's, and I think we've said it, that's a big difference, right? He sort of drops off the map for a long time in the anime, and the payoff for that's big. But I like that they're sort of bringing his character along to sort of have him as Luffy's opposite.
Yeah, I mean, it's setting them up to be, like you said, a natural rival almost. But we'll touch on that later on here. But yeah, I'll leave it with this, that this episode was fairly fast-paced because they did condense down that entire Buggy arc from the anime into one episode here, and then throw in some extra Marine lore on top, and then with a dash of flashback material going on there. And so I felt like this episode did feel faster than episode 1, but I do still think that it was very enjoyable, and I definitely still am a fan of this episode and where the show is going as a whole still. Alright, so with that, it's going to be 2 Nerds signing off. We'll see you next time.
See ya.